Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's lecture on female dancers, singers, entertainers as the unsung heroes of India's freedom struggle. The aim of today's lecture is to critically assess popularly held notions about women in Islamic and British Empire. Also, an attempt would be made to examine critical issues of gender and power in the context of medieval and early modern Indian history. Also, we would like to examine the social reforms around the women's question in the modern period of Indian history. History has famously marginalized the voices of women, but even within that paradigm, India's female entertainers have received a flack known variously as Tawayabs in the north, Devadasis in the south, Baijis in Bengal and Naikins in Goa. These professional singers and dancers were dubbed as Notch girls during the British rule, and their profession was conflated with prostitution in the late 19th century. As a result, their contribution to India's classical arts was scrubbed out of the collective consciousness, and their stories found little place even in the margins of history. Author and historian Pran Neville, in his book Notch Girls of India, Dancers, Singers, Playmates, has thrown considerable light on their history, the evolution of their profession, and the metamorphosis that it underwent during the colonial period. In their days of glory, the courtesans were at the center of art and culture in most of the part of India. They were proficient in both music as well as dance, and as has been described by Neville, the Tawayabs of North India enjoyed wealth, power, prestige, political access, and were even considered as authorities on culture, knowledge, literature, etc. And several noble families would send their sons to them to learn tehzeeb or etiquette and the art of conversation or several other kinds of arts. Also, any kind of association with the Tawayaf was considered essentially as a status symbol. The Tawayafs reached their zenith under the Mughal rule. The best of the courtesans, called Deredar Tawayafs, claimed their descent from the royal Mughal courts, as has been pointed out by Neville. To be associated with the Tawayaf was considered to be a symbol of status, wealth, sophistication as well as culture, and no one considered her to be a bad woman or an object of pity, because she had a sphere of her own and she was the one who would be calling the shots most of the times. However, one also needs to understand the issue of hierarchy. There were women of wealth and agency, and any sexual relationship with them was likely to be consensual, and it could not be enforced, as these were women of power and wealth. There were hierarchies within the performing artists, and the Tawayabs were at the top, a class distinct from street performances or prostitutes. However, this kind of hierarchy also underwent change, metamorphosis as well as several kind of challenges as a result of impact of colonialism. With the arrival of the British began a gradual decimation of their livelihoods. Their royal patronage declined as the territory under the English East India Company grew, but it was not until the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny that the institution was finally challenged, and it also started showing signs of erosion. Let us now capture journey of the Antinotch girls. Once honored by the royalty, rewarded by Nawabs, nobles, patronized by the European elite, and immortalized by several poets, chroniclers, pursued by the love-stick gallants, the Indian Antinotch girl was a symbol of glamour, grace, and glory, and also was considered as the epitome of performing arts. However, she was soon to pass into the pages of history, buried deep down with no achievements ascribed to her. As a dancer, singer, entertainer, and an occasional purveyor of sexual favors, the Antinotch girl played a significant role in the social and cultural life of India during the 18th and 19th centuries. She represented a synthesis of different cultures, dance forms, music, the classical and the popular. Over the centuries, she appeared in various incarnations, but chiefly as a dancer, earlier dedicated to the gods, and later on someone whose company could be enjoyed by the rich and the powerful. Even Unsung, the Chinese pilgrim who had visited India in the 7th century, testified to the existence of a well-established institution of temple dancers. While Mughal India saw the advent of the Antinotch girl on the cultural landscape of the country and her rise to the pinnacle of glory, the annexation by the British of Awadh in 1856 in the north and annexation of Tanjore in 1855 in the south, which were two dominant centers of Indian art and culture, gradually foreshadowed her decline and fall. So, once these two areas were controlled by the colonial regime, their downfall was inevitable, because these were the two very important regional centers of art, dance, culture, etc. And the Antinotch girl was playing a very important role in all these processes. Several factors for their downfall can be traced. The Nawabs of Awadh were among the last of the great patrons of dance and music. The early English sahibs, who bored with their lonely life in a strange land, had found in the Antinotch girl some kind of a vent and also an opportunity of lively entertainment and aesthetic satisfaction. However, there were several other factors also that were responsible for her downfall. One, of course, was the contradictory British policy. To consolidate their rule in the province of Awadh, the British turned their fury against the powerful elite of Lucknow, of which the Tawayabs was a very integral part. Yet, when it came to matters such as using these women as prostitutes for the European soldiers or collecting income tax, the pragmatic British government set aside their high moral position. It became the official policy to select the healthy and beautiful specimens from among the women and arbitrarily relocate them in the cantonment area for the convenience of the European soldiers. This not only dehumanized the profession, stripping it of its cultural function, but it also made sex cheaply available and easily accessible for British soldiers and also exposed the women to venereal infection from the soldiers. However, it was a different matter altogether, that ultimately it was these women who were declared as responsible for spreading venereal diseases among men. Then one can also talk about the impact of Western education, influx of English language, modern subjects, and as the 19th century wore on, the spread of English education brought in a new petite bourgeois class, which was influenced by the Western ideas of morality, and it gradually got alienated from the art and cultural traditions of the country. Now, this educated group was particularly swayed by the writings of some foreign observers, intellectuals, who, without understanding the origin and nature of Indian dance, art, music, etc., and they mistook this entire cultural paradigm for a representation of erotica in the form of temple sculptures, and they condemned it as a repulsive and immoral act. So therefore, the entire history and culture of Indian subcontinent was reduced to the myopic view of British intelligentsia. As a result, the feelings of shame and guilt crept in, and they made no distinction between an accomplished professional nautch girl or a devdasi and a common prostitute, dubbing both of them in the same category of fallen women. The educated Indians who were suffering as it is from an inferiority complex, because they were part of the colonial system and they were the subjects of the imperialist power. So they were overcome with this sense of shame and guilt about their own traditional arts, about their own customs and traditions, and they did not miss an opportunity to prove to the Britishers that they were as aware and as broad-minded and as unorthodox as them, and hence they gave up the affinity towards past practices. Then one can also describe the role of missionaries in this entire process of decline. The missionaries had extended their activities by setting up educational institutions, printing presses, hospitals, etc. And in their efforts to propagate the virtues of the Christian civilization, they denounced Indian religious practices, social customs, manners, gatherings, performances, etc. And the Nautch institution specifically came under heavy attack, as this was made an issue of morality. In fact, some educated Indians even went to the extent of saying that Nautch aroused anti-Christian feelings, something that was also championed by several missionaries and came to be adopted as an idea by several educated Indians as well. Now, this was also a time when several new modes of entertainment were appearing as compared to the late 18th century. So, the sahibs who had in the late 18th century or in the early part of 19th century used to enjoy nautch parties because there was nothing else to do, now started experiencing a change in their life pattern in the post-mutiny era. With easier travel, arrival of British women in greater numbers and larger opportunities for indulging in ballroom dancing, and their own kinds of entertainment, sporting activities, the nautch entertainment ceased to be a prime source of amusement, especially in the presidency towns. So, once this change started happening, the demand for nautch girls further decreased. A number of English men and painters were very much interested in capturing the image of nautch girls, and this was a favorite theme also, which was kind of used to represent the culture of this land. In 1892 specifically, a movement started, an anti-nautch movement started at Madras, which soon spread to other parts of the country. So, while the English Sahibs continued to honor their native hosts by attending nautch parties on festive occasions, on special days and functions, they would also look down upon at the barbarous arts of the East and the way Eastern civilization treated its women. In their drive against nautch, the missionaries were joined by a powerful group of educated Indian social reformers also, who were largely influenced by Western ideas, English education, Victorian moral values, and finally they lost pride in their own cultural heritage. So, the anti-nautch movement was inspired by the Madras Christian Literature Society, which had launched propaganda against the nautch girls invited by the local gentry to perform in honor of British dignitaries. And in fact, a nautch performance was held for the Prince of Wales during his visit in 1875, which was much criticized. A number of allegations were being raised from time to time against the nautch girls. They were accused of impoverishing and ruining their patrons. The British official elite were urged, and in fact they were specially directed to refrain from attending functions where nautch entertainment was provided. So, there was this entire official machinery that was working towards eradication of this old practice. In an exclusive pamphlet addressed to English ladies, they were advised never to attend any such gathering themselves and to use all their influence over their husbands and men of their families to prevent them from participating in such gatherings. Then there was another publication, an appeal to educated Hindus, which highlighted the evil effects of nautch girls, ranging from poverty, loss of wealth, bodily weakness, several kind of diseases, and also falling of one's character. They were told to reform their evil social customs, and also an attempt was being made to banish nautch girls from the realms of respectable society. A number of portraits came to be made by the artists, by the contemporary artists, by European artists, which depicted the portrait of the dancing girls. As you can just see, this portrait can be traced to 1815. In addition, there were a series of media campaigns also. The anti-nautch campaign gathered momentum, especially with the support of Indian press and the social purity associations that were sponsored by the purity movement that was going on in England for reform of public and private morals. Miss Tennant came all the way from England to India to persuade educated Indians to boycott their own dances and their own associations or organizations which hosted such events. So the reformers' campaigns played a very active role in this process. The Punjab Purity Association launched a very forceful drive against notches and published a booklet also which contained the opinions of several Punjabis, the educated intelligentsia, who vehemently condemned such activities and especially the performances by Notch girls. The booklet highlighted the denunciation of this performance and a very virulent attack was put forward by the reformer Keshav Chandra Sen, who described the Notch girl as a hideous woman who has hell in her eyes. They also solicited the support of the excellencies in their efforts to remove this evil practice on the ground that it had no sanction of religion nor any claim to be considered as an important institution that had to be carried forward. However, the Viceroy and the Governor, who had been present on several occasions during which notches had been performed, did not find anything which was considered improper. So, several times they would turn down the plea to ban the notches. However, the Indian press was not satisfied and it continued to plead for official support for the anti-notch campaign. Finally, a very important role was played by British women's campaigns also, like Mrs. Marcus Fuller, who was wife of an English missionary in Bombay, who in her book The Wrongs of Indian Womanhood, that was published in 1900, strongly condemned the institution and the practice of dedicating girls to this profession. In her support of the anti-notch campaign, she wrote that we are convinced that if the highest officials in India would boycott such parties on moral grounds, then it would have an impact, and the Indians also would soon be ashamed and they would kind of stop hosting such events in name of public entertainments. The persistent efforts of the reformers eventually bore fruit in 1905 when a decision was finally taken not to provide notch entertainment at the reception that was to be held in honor of the Prince of Wales in Madras. So, finally, the moral censorship dealt a death blow to the traditional dance art nurtured and preserved by the Notch girls through the ages, and in the process it also impaired the aesthetic standards. So, this entire process finally captures the tragedy of irony that the dance, which had in fact a special role to play in the society of not only entertainment but also expression of desires, was being banned, and all this was being done in the name of morality. However, it was not the songs or the dances that were declared to be immoral. Rather, it was the Notch girl who was the subject of contempt. The reformers had their way in degrading the dancing profession as well as its practitioners. Thank you.